A police dog's fight against a criminal canine who knew no mercy. Detective Nathan Cross and his canine Diesel are hunting a criminal mastermind using a vicious canine to orchestrate high-stakes heists. When Diesel faces off against this deadly rival, the battle pushes both dogs to their limits. As the stakes rise, Nathan must rely on Diesel's instincts to outsmart a dog trained for one purpose: destruction. In a final showdown, loyalty and skill are tested in a fight for survival. Will Diesel prevail or be outmatched by a canine with no mercy? The city had seen crime before, but nothing like this. The robberies were precise, almost surgical, leaving law enforcement baffled. Not a single fingerprint, no footprints, no security camera ever caught a clear image of the culprit. Witnesses gave conflicting reports. Some swore they saw a man, others insisted no one was there. The pattern was unlike anything Detective Nathan Cross had encountered in his years as a canine handler. Nathan sat in his unmarked car, parked a block away from the most recent crime scene, a high-end jewelry store that had been cleaned out in less than 3 minutes. Diesel, his Belgian Malinois, sat alert in the passenger seat, his ears twitching at every distant sound. The crime had taken place in the dead of night, yet the only disturbance reported was the sound of shattering glass and the store's alarm going off moments later. By the time officers arrived, the thief had vanished. Nathan stepped out of the car, Diesel following closely. Yellow police tape lined the storefront. Officers milled about, talking in hushed tones. Detective Ramirez, one of Nathan's longtime colleagues, waved him over. "You're not going to believe this," Ramirez muttered, pointing at the security monitor inside the store. Nathan followed his gaze to the screen. The footage replayed the moment of the robbery. The glass shattered, the alarm blared, and then a figure moved. It wasn't a man. It wasn't even a shadow. It was a dog. A large, dark-coated canine slipping through the broken window, darting past the alarms with practiced agility. It leaped onto the display cases, snatched jewelry with its jaws, and disappeared into the night. Nathan's eyes narrowed. "That's impossible." Ramirez shook his head. "I thought the same thing. But there it is." Nathan's superior, Captain Holloway, scoffed from behind them. "Dogs don't commit crimes. That's just a strays caught in the middle of the real action." Nathan studied the footage again. The dog wasn't running at random. It was too deliberate, too precise. No hesitation, no wasted motion. He knew trained movement when he saw it. "That's no stray." "Then what do you call it?" Holloway crossed his arms. Nathan glanced at Diesel. "A problem." Before Holloway could respond, a call came through the police radio. "All units, we have a break-in at Blackridge Research Facility. Possible suspect on site." Nathan exchanged a look with Ramirez before jogging back to his car. Diesel hopped into the passenger seat. Nathan started the engine. "Let's see if we can catch a ghost." The drive to Blackridge was tense. The facility housed sensitive government research, meaning this wasn't a typical robbery. Security was tight. Whoever was behind these crimes was escalating. As they arrived, the scene was chaotic. Guards were down, but alive. The back gate had been forced open. Nathan and Diesel moved in, weaving through the industrial corridors of the facility. The lights flickered, a sign that the security system had been tampered with. A low growl escaped Diesel's throat. Nathan tensed. Diesel never growled without reason. He followed his partner's gaze down the hallway. A figure stood at the far end. It wasn't human. A dog, nearly identical to the one in the footage, stood in the center of the hallway, its dark coat barely visible against the dim lighting. It didn't run. It didn't attack. It simply stared. Then, as if making a choice, it turned and sprinted into the shadows. Nathan and Diesel gave chase. They rounded the corner, but the corridor was empty. The only thing left behind was a single piece of evidence, something that sent a chill through Nathan's chest. A shredded K9 police vest. Nathan stood frozen, gripping the torn canine vest in his hands. The fabric was ripped clean through, as if precision cut rather than simply torn apart in a struggle. Diesel sniffed at the vest, his ears twitching as he processed the scent. But as Nathan watched his partner work, an unsettling realization crept in. Diesel, one of the best tracking dogs on the force, seemed hesitant. His usual determination wavered, his focus shifting as if the scent trail was inconsistent. "What is it, boy?" Nathan muttered, kneeling beside Diesel. The dog huffed, sniffing again, but then let out a sharp exhale and sat back on his haunches. No trail. No lead to follow. It was as if the dog responsible for this had vanished into thin air. Back at the precinct, Nathan spread out the evidence on his desk. Every robbery had a common pattern, but the involvement of a trained dog changed everything. The video footage, the vest, the lack of any identifiable human suspect, it was becoming clear that whoever was behind these crimes was using an animal that could outfox law enforcement at every turn. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Ramirez stepped in, tossing a manila folder onto Nathan's desk. "You're going to want to see this." Nathan flipped it open. The coroner's report. The victims, security guards, a few officers who had attempted pursuit, hadn't been killed but had been systematically disabled. Broken bones in the same places, pressure points targeted with pinpoint accuracy. "These injuries," Nathan murmured, "they're not random. They're strategic. Whoever's behind this trained that dog for more than just stealing. It's a weapon." Ramirez crossed his arms. "That's what I thought too, so I dug deeper. There's a guy, ex-military, used to be top of his field in canine combat training. Silas Graves. Got discharged under questionable circumstances. Name ring a bell?" Nathan's jaw clenched. "Yeah, he was one of the best. Specialized in training dogs to counter police units. If he's behind this, then he's turned one of his dogs into a ghost." Nathan took a slow breath. "We need to find him. Now." Later that night, Nathan sat in a dimly lit warehouse, across from a man whose entire life revolved around training canines for underground fighting circuits. The trainer leaned back, arms crossed. "You're telling me there's a dog out there running heists?" "Not just any dog," Nathan replied. "One trained to outthink, outrun, and outfight K9 officers." The man scoffed. "Sounds like Graves' work. If he's got his hands on a dog like that, you're in trouble. He never trained them to lose." Nathan slid a photo of the shredded canine vest across the table. "Then tell me how to beat it." The trainer exhaled sharply. "You don't." Nathan's stomach sank. 2 days passed, and the city reeled from the chaos left in Silas Graves' wake. A high-stakes bank heist had turned into a battlefield, leaving a dozen people injured, including officers who had barely made it out alive. The footage from the security cameras was unlike anything Nathan had ever seen. Vortex moved like a specter, weaving through gunfire, knocking down officers with precision strikes, and vanishing before reinforcements arrived. Nathan leaned over the evidence board, the bank's blueprints spread out before him. Every route, every plot, had been executed with military efficiency. He traced the path Vortex had taken, his fingers lingering on the exit point. "He's not just running jobs," Ramirez said from behind him. "He's testing us. Figuring out how we react, how we move." Nathan nodded. "And the moment we think we're getting ahead, he pulls us 3 steps back." Diesel paced by his side, ears flicking up every so often, his body tense. He had been restless since the chase that nearly cost him his leg. Nathan hadn't forgotten that moment. He had watched, heart hammering, as Diesel pursued Vortex through an alley, closing in, only for the rival K9 to execute a scheme so precise it seemed impossible. Diesel had barely registered the wire before his back leg caught it. If Nathan hadn't been there to cut him loose, the injury would have been catastrophic. Nathan knelt beside Diesel, running a hand along the dog's back. "We're not letting that happen again." He spent the next hour studying military canine strategies, trying to map out what Vortex might do next. But every time he thought he had a pattern, the evidence pointed to something different. Silas was anticipating his every move, laying false trails that led them in circles. Then came the message. Nathan's phone buzzed with an encrypted audio file. He played it, the distorted voice crackling through the speaker. "You don't track me. I track you. And your dog? He's just another pawn." Nathan gripped the phone, every muscle in his body tensing. Diesel lifted his head, eyes locked on the door. A low, steady growl rumbled from deep within his chest. Nathan followed Diesel's gaze. Beyond the window, the shadows outside seemed deeper than usual, shapes barely shifting in the night. Something was out there. Nathan remained still, his eyes narrowing as Diesel's growl deepened. The window offered little visibility into the night, but he knew better than to dismiss his partner's instincts. Silas had played them before, setting traps in ways no ordinary criminal could. This was different. This wasn't about a job or another hit. This was personal. He reached for his sidearm, moving slowly so as not to disrupt Diesel's focus. The dog's posture was rigid, muscles coiled beneath his coat. If Vortex was out there, it meant Silas was watching too. Nathan's phone vibrated. Another message, text this time. "Step outside, no backup, no weapons, let's talk." Nathan exhaled sharply, considering his options. He wasn't foolish enough to think this was a negotiation. It was bait. But if Silas was shifting tactics, pushing for direct contact instead of running jobs, it meant he wanted something. And Nathan needed to know what. "Not tonight," he muttered, powering off his phone. Diesel's growl remained steady, eyes locked on the window. Nathan reached down, scratching just behind the dog's ear. "We play this our way." The following day, Nathan met with Ramirez and Captain Wells in a briefing room cluttered with crime scene photos and surveillance reports. "He's pushing buttons now," Ramirez said, tossing a folder onto the table. "You don't poke at a cop's home unless you're trying to get inside his head." "He's already inside," Nathan admitted. That message last night wasn't a threat. It was a shift in strategy. "He's watching our response time, how we react under pressure." Wells crossed his arms. "So, what's the move?" Nathan's jaw tightened. "We set the stage." He laid out his plan, a fabricated high-stakes shipment, something that would be too tempting for Silas to ignore. The details would be carefully leaked, just enough to make it seem like the police had stumbled onto something big. A perfect opportunity for Silas to pull off another heist. But the real goal wasn't the shipment. It was Vortex. If Nathan could get Diesel close enough, he could study the rival K9's movement, find the gaps in Silas' training. Every dog had a weakness. He just had to find it before it was too late. The night of the setup arrived. The police force staged their presence carefully, appearing just vulnerable enough to give the illusion of a lapse in security. Nathan and Diesel waited in position near the warehouse where the shipment was stored, listening through the comms as officers reported in. Then, the first breach. A security feed blinked offline. "Showtime," Ramirez muttered through the radio. Nathan held Diesel steady, watching the entrance. The dog's ears twitched at a nearly imperceptible sound. Movement. Controlled. Intentional. Then, just as planned, Vortex emerged, sleek and calculated in his approach. But something was off. He wasn't attacking. Diesel tensed, prepared to engage, but Vortex turned, leading him away from the shipment. Nathan barely had time to react before realization struck. "This isn't a hit," he breathed. "It's a trap." A steel door slammed shut behind them. The factory lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows. Nathan turned sharply, weapon raised, Diesel at his side. Silas stepped forward, hands in his pockets, calm as ever. "You knew I'd come," Nathan said. Silas smirked. "Of course." He gestured toward Diesel. And you brought the only thing that matters to you. Nathan steadied his stance. If you think this ends with you walking away, you don't know me. Silas chuckled. You still don't get it. I've already won. At that moment, Vortex lunged at Diesel. The two dogs collided, a storm of muscle and instinct. Diesel snapped, driving forward, but Vortex twisted, countering with a level of precision that sent Diesel skidding back. Nathan moved, but Silas was already there, striking with force. The impact sent him reeling against a crate. He fought to regain control, but Silas was relentless. Walk away, Silas said, pinning Nathan down. Or watch him fall. Nathan's fingers found the grip of his gun, his breath sharp. He had to end this. Then, a gunshot. Everything stopped. The air hung heavy. Nathan's ears rang as the sound faded, leaving only a single image in his vision. Diesel, motionless, and Silas, standing tall. Nathan's pulse hammered as Diesel remained still on the warehouse floor. A crimson stain darkened the fur along his side, but the slow rise and fall of his chest confirmed he was still breathing. Relief threatened to cloud his focus, but there was no time. Silas watched, arms relaxed, satisfied smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. You really thought you could win this? Silas mused, gesturing toward Diesel. Vortex isn't just a dog. He's the future. No hesitation, no weaknesses. You can't train loyalty, you condition obedience. Nathan forced himself upright, his grip steadying around his weapon. His mind raced through possibilities. Diesel wasn't just injured, he was broken. Whatever Silas had done to Vortex, it had stripped Diesel of the very instinct that had made him formidable. If this was going to end in their favor, the rules had to change. Vortex stood a few feet away, poised but not attacking. Silas had made sure the dog wasn't acting on his own. Every move was calculated, programmed. Diesel, on the other hand, had always been more than a tool. He had instinct. He had trust. And that was something Silas would never understand. Nathan holstered his weapon and took a deliberate step forward. You trained him to follow orders without question. But what happens when there's no order left to follow? Silas arched an eyebrow. You tell me. Nathan crouched beside Diesel, fingers grazing his fur. The warmth was reassuring. He lowered his voice, speaking just for him. We do this your way now. No rules, no patterns. Just you and me. Diesel's ear twitched slightly, but his body remained tense. Nathan needed to break through. Vortex was predictable because he was conditioned. Diesel had to be everything Silas didn't see coming. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small treat, something Diesel had loved since his first day on the force. He held it between his fingers, letting the scent carry. Diesel's eyes flickered with recognition, a sliver of something deeper surfacing beneath the exhaustion. It wasn't just about food. It was about breaking the script. Nathan tossed the treat, not toward Diesel, but behind him. A simple act, an unexpected movement. And Diesel reacted, his head lifted slightly, instinct struggling against what had been forced upon him. Vortex shifted in response, gaze locking onto Diesel like a machine awaiting new input. But there was no script for this. Diesel wasn't fighting like a trained canine anymore. He was thinking. Silas scoffed. You're wasting your time. Nathan stood, confidence settling into his stance. No, I'm taking it back. A new energy rippled through Diesel's frame. He rose slowly, muscles taut but controlled. There was pain, but there was also something else, resolve. This wasn't about orders anymore. It was about choice. Nathan stepped back, allowing Diesel the space to act on his own. The dog met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Then, Diesel turned toward Vortex, not as an opponent, but as an equal. Vortex hesitated. Silas's fingers twitched at his side, an unspoken command lingering on his lips. But he never gave it. Because, for the first time, Vortex didn't wait for one. Diesel moved, not with brute force, but with unpredictability. He feinted left, then pivoted, using agility instead of strength. Vortex reacted too late, caught off guard by something he had never been trained to counter. Diesel's teeth caught the edge of his harness, twisting the larger dog's weight against him. Vortex stumbled. Silas cursed, stepping forward, but Nathan was already there. He drove his fist into Silas's ribs, then twisted his arm back, forcing him to the ground. The struggle was brief. Silas had always relied on control, and without it, he was just a man grasping at something already slipping away. Vortex, disoriented, looked to Silas for direction. But no command came. Diesel stood firm, breathing heavy but steady, watching his opponent. Vortex took a step back, uncertainty in his stance for the first time. Nathan pinned Silas, his knee pressing into his back. "It's over." The sound of sirens built in the distance. Backup was coming. Silas thrashed once more, but it was no use. Control had been his greatest weapon, and now it was gone. Nathan looked to Diesel, pride swelling in his chest. The dog had fought not because he was commanded to, but because he had chosen to. And that was something no amount of conditioning could ever erase. Silas's empire had crumbled. Vortex, trained to be a machine, had found himself outmatched by something far more powerful: free will. As the police stormed the warehouse, Nathan placed a firm hand on Diesel's back. "We won." Diesel stood tall, his breaths heavy but measured, eyes locked onto Vortex. The sirens outside grew louder, the flashing red and blue lights casting streaks across the warehouse walls. Officers flooded in, weapons drawn, orders sharp and precise. Nathan didn't move, his grip still firm on Silas as the officers closed in. Silas's expression barely shifted as they dragged him up, wrists forced behind his back. He turned his head slightly, his gaze landing on Vortex, who remained rooted in place. A slow smirk crept onto his face as he muttered, "You didn't win. You just changed the rules." Nathan ignored him, giving a sharp nod to Ramirez as she took over. Diesel's ears flicked as he tracked every movement, exhaustion clear but resolve unshaken. He had given everything, and yet he still stood. As Silas was led away, Vortex lowered himself to the ground beside the spot where his handler had fallen. He didn't fight, didn't run. He simply sat, watching as his world crumbled around him. He had never been given a choice until now. Nathan took a slow breath before kneeling beside Diesel, running a hand over the dog's back. "We're done here." But as he looked at Vortex, a thought settled in his mind. The fight with Silas was over, but somewhere, someone else was already training another Vortex. The cycle wouldn't end here. And Nathan wasn't finished yet.